Why did a forgotten janitor trigger a national emergency? Why did 5 black SUVs surround a crumbling church in a town no one cared about? And why is the president looking for a man who hasn't spoken his real name in 40 years? Welcome to Bridal Creek, South Dakota. If you asked the locals about Tom Granger, most would shrug. But those who did remember him did so with an odd reverences, if the man had once been something far more than what he appeared. At 84, Tom moved like a ghost with purpose, thin and quiet, every step deliberate like someone preserving the last ounces of fuel in his body. His knotted fingers remained remarkably sure when handling tools, as if guided more by instinct than muscle memory. For the last 35 years, Tom had lived in a musty storeroom behind the old Trinity Baptist Church abandoned after a lightning strike collapsed half the steeple. The congregation had long moved into a glass-paneled mega-chapel on the other side of town. Every single morning, regardless of sun, sleet, or the freak hailstorms Bridal Creek was famous for, Tom would emerge, dragging out his makeshift cart and setting up his small repair station beneath a knotted sycamore tree that clawed the church's roof like a sentinel. His workbench was a battered door slab balanced on old milk crates. His tool sorted with surgical precision lived inside an old ammo box. A faded sign, hand-painted and dangling from a wire hanger, read, "Bikes fixed. No charge. Just kindness." He never advertised, never posted flyers. He never even told people his last name. Yet every morning, 8 sharp, he was there mending brakes, oiling rusty chains, patching tires. Especially for kids, or those who couldn't afford the pristine, overpriced bike shop run by smug-faced Randy over on Main Street. Tom charged nothing. Well, maybe the occasional oatmeal raisin cookie, or a thank you drawing that he pinned on the inside of his door. "Why do you bother, old-timer?" people would ask, and Tom's reply was always the same. Everyone needs a way to move forward. Some just can't afford the wheels. The peaceful rhythm of this strange little arrangement lasted until the unthinkable happened. Bridal Creek was approved for a flashy federal revitalization grant. The moment the money was announced, that decaying church ignored for decades suddenly became prime real estate. "We can turn that eyesore into something with value," said Calvin Stroud, the newly crowned head of municipal development, during a town meeting that lasted 7 exhausting hours. "A tech-friendly co-working hub, maybe a yoga center. We need innovation, not crusty bicycle monks." The vote passed in a heartbeat. Calvin was handed the reins, including the job of removing unauthorized squatters. That following Monday, Calvin strutted up to Tom's repair stand flanked by 2 city maintenance men in neon vests. Tom was hunched over a lime green tricycle, tightening the front axle with methodical care. "Mr. Granger," Calvin said, like he was reading a parking ticket, "the city has repurposed this property. Your hobby is now a liability. That sign? Comes down? All this gear? Gone by Friday." Tom looked up, eyes squinting against the morning light. A group of kids waiting with their battered bikes stared, confused and uncertain. Calvin, smirking, leaned toward one of his men and whispered just loud enough for Tom to hear, "These dusty old relics always get sentimental before the bulldozers show up." Tom didn't flinch. He finished adjusting the tricycle's axle, spun the wheel once, and handed it back to a wide-eyed little boy. Then, silently, he stood, moved to his bench, and began packing his tools into the ammo box with steady hands. By mid-afternoon, the rumor had flared across Bridal Creek like a grease fire. Parents flooded the mayor's office with calls. The reply? Final decision. No exceptions. The kids were less polite. 10 of them gathered on the church lawn with homemade signs. "Don't scrap Tom's shack," and "My bike runs because of him." Their tiny protest got a few honks, a few smiles, but no real change. Tom never argued. He simply shifted his station closer to the church wall, shadowed beneath the thickest part of the sycamore. His sign now leaned against the tree's trunk, half hidden in the roots, like an offering to some old god. 3 days later, Tom was tightening the brakes on a red BMX when he heard something that didn't belong. A low, building thunder overhead. Not a storm, not thunder. Jet engines. Big ones. People stepped out of shops and diners, shading their eyes in confusion. A massive military-style aircraft was descending toward Bridal Creek's forgotten airstrip, the kind that hadn't seen use since the Nixon era. And then the black SUVs came. 5 of them, engines growling, sweeping through Main Street like sharks. They stopped at the front gate of the crumbling church. Doors opened. Men in tailored suits stepped out with grim expressions. The leader, dressed in a dark navy suit, approached Tom directly. "Sir," he said calmly, "we're looking for Thomas Granger. Would that be you?" Everyone in town stopped breathing. Because when the government shows up for a bicycle repairman, something's wrong with the universe. The tension cracked across Bridal Creek like a dropped pane of glass. Whispers exploded in every direction. Was he a spy? A criminal? A former agent gone rogue? Calvin Stroud burst through the crowd, puffed up with self-importance. "I'm the director of planning here," he barked at the nearest suit. "What is this about?" The man barely blinked at him, then turned back to Tom. "Sir?" he repeated. "Are you Thomas Granger?" Tom nodded slowly, setting his wrench down. "Been a while since anyone called me that." The 4 SUVs had now formed a wall around the churchyard. The man in the navy suit introduced himself as Franklin Wade, special advisor to the president. "Mr. Granger," he said, "someone very important wants a word with you. Someone who says you fixed his red bicycle. Summer of 1985. Tom's eyes narrowed. His face didn't change, but something old flickered behind his gaze. A memory or maybe a warning. He'd fixed a lot of bikes. But that one, he remembered. That particular bike belonged to a nervous 9-year-old with scraped knees and a stubborn attitude, said Franklin Wade, the man in the navy suit. You replaced the chain, realigned the gear hub, tightened the brakes, and added reflectors. He paused, studying Tom Granger's face. You also gave him a new bell, shaped like a rocket ship. A flicker passed across Tom's weathered features. He gave a slow nod. Red frame, white racing stripes on the fenders? Wade's stoic mask cracked into a faint smile. That's the one. What's this about? Tom asked, wiping his hands on a cloth already soaked in 1,000 fixes worth of grease and grime. Mr. Granger, we need you to prepare for a very important visitor. Wade's tone was calm, but had the weight of a thundercloud behind it. Air Force One just touched down at Bridal Creek's airfield. The President of the United States would like to see you. The crowd collectively gasped. Calvin Stroud, ever confident just moments ago, turned an almost comical shade of ash. Wait, what president? Why? Tom's mouth opened slightly, confusion giving way to dawning realization. That kid? With the rocket bell? Wade nodded. President Elias Mercer. He was 9 that summer, staying with his grandmother while his mom worked double shifts in the city. That bicycle was his escape, his joy, and, for a time, his only freedom. 20 minutes later, the presidential motorcade crept over the rise like an approaching legend. Sleek black SUVs fanned out along the road. Secret Service agents moved swiftly, setting up a tight perimeter around the churchyard. The crowd had doubled, maybe tripled, spilling out onto the sidewalks. Everyone glued to the moment like it was the finale of a show they didn't know they'd been watching all their lives. Then, without pomp or speech, President Elias Mercer stepped from his limousine. No fanfare, no dramatic music. Just a man in a tailored suit, tall, confident, sharp-eyed, but as he walked toward Tom, the leader of the free world began to look like someone else entirely. Mr. Granger, he said, extending his hand. You probably don't remember me, but I've never forgotten you. Tom straightened up with a quiet pride, meeting the handshake with a grip that still had steel in it. You had playing cards clipped to the spokes, he said, made that thing sound like a dirt bike. Mercer's face split into a wide, genuine smile. You do remember. And there they stood, one man shaped by power, the other by years of quiet service bound by a single act, buried under decades of dust. When I was 9, the president said, turning slightly so his voice carried to the now recording news cameras, my bike broke, chain snapped, gears jammed, handlebars twisted. That thing was everything to Memmy ticket to summer programs, the library, Anywhere I didn't want to be alone. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. I walked that broken bike for 3 miles, sobbing. I knew my mom couldn't afford to fix it. She was already skipping meals just to pay the rent. And then, I found this place. He turned toward Tom. He didn't ask questions, didn't ask where my parents were or if I could pay. He just looked at the bike and said, "Let's see what we can do." Tom shifted, visibly uncomfortable in the spotlight, but Mercer pressed on. "He didn't just fix my bike," the president said. "He repaired something deeper. He taught me that kindness doesn't need a receipt. That dignity is something you give freely, not something you gatekeep. That helping someone shouldn't depend on whether they're able to return the favor." From inside his jacket, President Mercer pulled out a small, laminated photo. He handed it to Tom gently. It showed a young Elias, barely 9, sitting on a red bike brand new chain, glinting in the sun. A younger Tom stood beside him, hand on his shoulder. And next to them, a weary woman with the unmistakable look of a single mother doing everything she could to stay afloat. "My mother kept this photo in her wallet until the day she died," the president said. "She wrote on the back, 'The only one who helped us,' without asking why." Tom stared at the photo, expression unreadable. Then slowly, he looked up. "She tried to pay me," he said. $5 bill. I remember because her hand was shaking when she held it out." Mercer nodded. "That was her grocery money. She told me later she'd planned to go without food just to keep me in that summer program. The one that kept me from falling in with the wrong crowd. The one that changed my life. But you," he paused, voice steady, "you wouldn't take it." "No one should have to choose between groceries and their kid's bike," Tom muttered. "Some things ought to just work. No fee." President Mercer turned back to the audience. "I've signed bills into law. Saturday, at tables with world leaders. Made decisions that impacted millions. But the lesson that shaped how I led, the reason I chose to serve the public, started right here. With a stranger, a broken bike, and an act of compassion that expected nothing in return." He placed a hand gently on Tom's shoulder. "You didn't just repair my bicycle, Mr. Granger. You realigned the course of my life." The crowd was still, a rare kind of silence, deep, respectful, and moved. People were crying. Even Calvin Stroud, who had once called Tom a municipal eyesore, now stood slack, jawed, red-faced, staring as if seeing him for the first time. Tom, never one to bask in admiration, just nodded and said, "Was just doing what needed doing, sir." "That," replied the president, "is exactly the point." President Mercer turned to the cameras now, his voice calm but piercing. "Has anyone ever helped you without asking questions? Without caring about your last name, your wallet, or your status? If so, share it. Share their name. Share what they did. Because those moments, they're everything." He spelled it out slowly for the audience. GRATEFUL. Post it. Tell someone. But he wasn't done. Not yet. With a subtle shift in his tone, he turned his gaze to the crumbling church building. "I understand," he said, loud enough for everyone within 5 blocks to hear, "that there are plans to demolish this place, to replace it with something shiny and new." Calvin took a hesitant step forward, adjusting his tie. Yes, Mr. President. We've secured federal funding for a modern community center with, Wi-Fi and smoothie bars. The redevelopment plans are already underway," Calvin Stroud muttered, trying to regain his footing. "Approved by whom?" President Mercer asked, his tone still calm, almost casual, but with a weight behind it that could crush steel. "The town council, sir," Calvin said quickly. "Unanimous vote." President Mercer nodded slowly, gaze shifting from the weather-beaten church to the rust-streaked cart that had served as Tom Granger's repair shop for decades. "And what about Mr. Granger's work here? Was that taken into account?" Calvin's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "Well, we determined it was an unauthorized occupation of public property, technically, a liability risk." "I see," the president replied, still polite, still measured, but those who understood him knew what was coming. "Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Stroud." Mercer turned to face the man directly. I see someone who served this town more consistently than any elected official. I see a place where children were taught trust, not policies. I see a man who gave freely, without expectation, in a world that rarely gives anything without a receipt. He gestured toward Tom's splintered bench and the battered ammo box. You don't demolish places like that. You protect them. You amplify them. Even if all they offer is one small wheel turning one kid riding forward who couldn't before. Then, with the authority that had once signed emergency orders and stared down prime ministers, President Mercer turned to his chief of staff. Restructure the grant. Effective immediately. This church stays. It will be restored, not raised. Gasps swept through the crowd. Half of it will become Mr. Granger's official bicycle repair center weather. Sealed, equipped, safe. The other half can be your community center. No smoothie bars unless he approves. Applause thundered. Kids leapt into the air like confetti. Parents clapped until their palms stung. Even the older folks, who rarely stood for anything but bingo night, nodded with damp eyes and proud smiles. Calvin looked like he'd swallowed a cactus. But, sir, the contractors? They'll be paid to restore, not destroy, Mercer replied, voice hardening just a degree. Let this place stand as a testament. That service isn't just a slogan. It's something you do. Something like fixing a bike for a kid who's got nowhere else to go. And then the floodgates opened. People who'd remained silent before now stepped forward, their voices rising like sparks. He fixed my daughter's bike 2 days before Christmas, said a woman near the front. We couldn't afford a new one. He added a basket with purple ribbons. She cried with joy. He rebuilt my trike so I could still ride after my arthritis got bad, said an elderly man leaning on a cane. I can still get to my meds thanks to him. Tried to pay. He waved me off. One by one, the stories poured out, each a piece of a puzzle the town hadn't realized it was missing. Tom had been their invisible backbone. Now, he was the heartbeat they finally heard. With cameras rolling, and the press frantically scrambling to document what had become a national story, President Mercer returned to the small podium hastily set up near the sycamore. I have 2 more announcements, he said. First, the federal grant is hereby doubled, with the condition that Mr. Granger is consulted on every step of restoration, every bolt, every coat of paint. Cheers again. Tom looked like he'd rather disappear into the bark of the tree, but Mercer wasn't done. Second, Mr. Granger served with distinction in Korea. A collective hush fell. He received the Bronze Star for valor. He rescued 3 wounded men under enemy fire, and never once mentioned it. Gasps turned to stunned silence. Even those who'd known Tom for years blinked in disbelief. The man who tightened their kids' handlebars had once run into gunfire. But Mercer wasn't finished. A presidential aide stepped forward with several documents. He's been donating nearly his entire military pension to the Bridal Creek Children's Hospital since 1972, Mercer said. And he's refused every offer to commercialize his repair model. No franchises, no chains, no brand deals. He wanted it to stay local, personal. As the truth of who Tom Granger really was emerged, Calvin Stroud's last political instinct finally kicked in. He stepped to the mic, face red, voice tight. Effective immediately, he said. I resign as director of town planning. I failed to see the value of what we had, of what he gave. I pursued progress at the cost of preservation. That was wrong. Mercer gave a small nod, then addressed the crowd one last time. Today, I am proud to present Tom Granger with the Presidential Citizens Medallion of our highest civilian honors. It's awarded to Americans who serve their communities with quiet excellence and without ever needing to be seen. He placed the medal around Tom's neck. The old man, now blinking back tears, finally spoke. Mr. President, this isn't necessary. I just didn't want kids pushing busted bikes through snow. Simple words. No drama. Just the raw truth behind a lifetime of quiet, relentless good. It hit harder than any speech. Even the president's eyes misted. And then the moment that captured the heart of everything happened not from a camera, not from a mic, but from a child. A little girl, maybe 7, squeezed through the legs of adults. In her hand was a paper plate with a lopsided cupcake, pink frosting starting to melt. "My mom said I should give you this," she whispered to Tom. "We don't have money for fixing my bike yesterday, but kindness should be fed with something sweet." Tom knelt, his joints creaking like old floorboards, but his eyes shining. He took the cupcake with both hands, as if it were an Olympic torch. "Thank you, young lady," he said. "It's still warm, just like hearts are when a bike rides right." She smiled and skipped back to her mom, unaware that she'd just given the final, perfect punctuation to a day the town would never forget. By that evening, the story had exploded across the nation. Every major news outlet ran it as the headline: "The Bicycle Man and the President." Social media flooded with photos, tributes, and a now viral hashtag, number Be More Like Tom. Users shared stories of the quiet helpers in their own neighborhoods, the mechanics, the teachers, the kind old woman on the corner who always had a bandage and a cookie. The president's press secretary confirmed what few had expected: Air Force One wouldn't be leaving that night. President Mercer had decided to stay, citing unfinished conversations and the best apple pie I've ever had. That evening, the town's only diner was filled beyond capacity. Booths were crammed, pie trays emptying fast, and through it all sat two men, the leader of the free world and the bicycle repairman who had unknowingly helped him find his path. They shared meatloaf and mashed potatoes as townspeople lingered nearby in quiet awe. At one point, between bites of pie, Mercer leaned in. "Why bicycles, Tom?" he asked. "Of all the ways you could have given back, why this?" Tom paused, fork in midair. "When I came back from Korea," he said, eyes not on the pie but somewhere far off, "I was busted up inside. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't smile. One day, I saw this kid crying over a snapped chain. I had a few tools in my pocket. Fixed it. The moment that chain caught and the wheel spun, his face lit up." He set the fork down slowly. "Something inside me spun too. That night, I slept. So the next day, I found another bike to fix. And another. Turns out, smiles beat nightmares. That's a kind of healing no doc can give you." President Mercer sat back, quiet for a moment. "So, all these years," he said softly, "every bike you fixed was fixing you, too." Tom nodded. "Guess we all need a reason to keep moving. Mine just happened to have two wheels and a busted chain." Dinner was wrapping up when Mercer made one final gesture, one not written in any press release. He handed Tom a small wooden box. Inside, a real key. "This isn't symbolic," Mercer explained. "It opens a workshop at the White House. Once a month, if you're willing, we'd like you to teach our staff Secret Service, aides, everyone how to fix bikes. They'll then offer free repairs to kids across underserved D.C. neighborhoods." For the first time all day, Tom Granger's composure cracked. He looked down at the key, and his hand trembled just a little. "Be honored, Mr. President," he whispered. "Have you ever seen someone the world overlooked finally get their moment? Type justice if you believe it always finds a way, especially when it matters most." 6 months later, the repair station behind the old church didn't look like it had been hit by Famite, looked like someone had honored it. The new awning bore professionally painted words: "The Quiet Repairman, since 1969. A nod to the past, not a glossing over." Inside, Tom's tools remained perfectly arranged, old and new side by side. High-end equipment had arrived from companies who were moved by his story, but the ammo box still sat proudly beside the bench. The church itself had been beautifully restored. Half served as a community center buzzing with programs, the other half a workshop where Tom now taught local youth how to repair bicycles. Near the entrance was a modest museum space. It told the story of a man, a red bicycle, and a moment that rippled out to reshape lives. One photo, President Elias Mercer as a boy, sitting tall on his repaired bike, stood out beside the original sign: "Bikes fixed, no charge, just kindness." Despite all the attention, Tom hadn't changed. Every morning at 8 a.m., he arrived like he always had. When kids wheeled in squeaky, wobbling bikes, he would just say, "Let's see what we can do." And once a month, he still traveled to Washington, D.C., now by invitation, to teach his workshop. The program had grown. 50 cities now hosted versions of Tom's simple model: repair bikes, repair trust, repair community. One crisp autumn afternoon, a boy watched silently as Tom adjusted a bent wheel. After a while, he asked, "Why don't you open a big shop? You could make a lot of money and fix way more bikes." Tom didn't stop turning the spoke key. He simply smiled and said, "Some things don't need to be big. They just need to be right." The boy's mother, standing nearby, nodded quietly. Later, she knelt down and told him, "Mr. Tom taught this whole town and even the president that worth isn't measured by size. It's measured by showing up, again and again, with heart." As Tom gave the wheel a final spin, the light caught a new brass plaque mounted on the wall behind him. It read, "A wheel turning again can push an entire life forward." Below it, another inscription: "Value isn't in the sign outside. It's in the hands that never refuse to help." And one final plaque completed the message. You might not remember his name, but if you ever had a childhood bicycle, you probably owe someone like him. Because sometimes one small act of kindness doesn't just fix a bike. It fixes a moment, a memory, a direction, maybe even the world. Tell us about a moment of kindness you'll never forget.